Welcome to Goobertown Hobbies. My name is Brent. I put magnets on all of my models, and it is 100% worth the effort. They're great for storage, transportation, and even holding minis while we're painting them. Over the years, I've learned a whole bunch of do's and don'ts, and I'm finally ready to share them in this video. I've got some clever tips that I want to show you. We'll talk about a whole lot of variations, but here's the basic idea. If you glue magnets to the bottom of your bases, you can stick them to steel transport trays. Or you can store them in cake pans. You can organize your work desk with baking trays. You can use magnetic painting handles. You can use magnetic painting sticks. You can decorate your refrigerator, or the hood of your car, or somebody else's car. This is dumb. Don't actually do this. And there's another way to use magnets in the hobby. You can use magnets instead of glue for certain joints in your model. This gives a bit of flexibility and makes it easier to swap equipment in and out. This method is all about drilling holes and implanting circular magnets that match your drill bits. There are some good uses for this type of magnetization, but I don't do it very often. In contrast, I almost always magnetize my bases. The magnets I use are neodymium rare earth magnets. These little buggers are super strong. A bunch of different vendors sell these, but I've been in the habit of ordering from sellers on eBay. Okay, sizes. If the magnets are too small, they'll be too weak. If they're too big, you'll damage the mini when you try to move them. Strong magnets may even betray you on the battlefield. Here are the sizes that I like. For standard 25mm bases, I use these circular magnets, 6mm diameter and 1.5mm thickness. For 32mm bases, I've been using rectangles that are 6mm by 4mm and 2mm thick. I also keep some 10mm diameter by 2mm thickness magnets around, and they handle most of the larger bases. For magnet sizes, there's an element of personal preference, but for my uses, magnets in this size range work pretty well. If you need something stronger, you can always use more than one. Steel rulers are handy for measuring magnet dimensions. If you're having trouble reading the tiny sizes, you can measure a stack of magnets and do the division. They stick right down there on the ruler and make it easy for you. In addition to the size of the magnets, the strength of magnetic attraction also depends on what you're sticking your minis to. The beefy magnets in my painting handles give a strong bond. This thick piece of steel holds really well too. Thinner sheets of steel are weaker, but still strong. Baking trays with their non-stick coatings are a little bit weaker. Flexible magnetic sheets can vary in their strength, but they're often not very strong. There's one more variable to consider: distance. So we don't want the magnets to be thicker than the rim of the bases, because that'll make the minis wobbly on the battlefield. Normally, there's a bit of empty space between the magnet and whatever you're sticking the mini to. Magnetic attraction decreases with the square of the distance between the two objects. So this actually has a big effect on the apparent strength of our magnets. If you find that a magnet isn't strong enough, you can either add a second one, or you can add a spacer to bring the magnet closer to the bottom surface of the base. One way to do this is to attach the magnets to the bases with green stuff, milliput, or some other strong epoxy putty. Put a lump of putty under the base, press the magnet into the putty, and then flip the base over and use the surface of a table to get a nice flush bottom to the base. Picking the right adhesive is important. The strength of the magnet is constantly fighting against the strength of the adhesive. Those magnets are super strong, and the surface area for gluing isn't very big. As mentioned, 2-part epoxy putties do a good job, and they're generally up to the task. I've found through experience that super glue isn't quite good enough. It'll last for a while, but from time to time I'll check my storage cake pans, and I'll find that a magnet has broken free and left a magnet-sized hole in the super glue. These days, most of the time I use a 2-part epoxy adhesive like this 5-minute stuff from Loctite. I've got a whole system for this. I lay out a ton of bases upside down. I put a dab of epoxy on each of them, and then I put down a magnet. I do my best to keep the polarity of all my bases the same so that they work with my painting handles. I use a reference magnet, and I glue down all the magnets in the same orientation. Every once in a while, I just like to do a giant batch of these bases. The epoxy is a double syringe, and it has a mixing tip on the end. Once I start, I work as fast as I can, and I try to crank through the entire tube of epoxy in one go. From time to time, even the epoxy can fail. In this case, the point of failure is always the bond between the epoxy and the plastic. As with any other type of glue, it's useful to scuff up the surface of the thing that you're gluing. Here I am using my Dremel tool to scratch up the bottom of bases before I glue magnets on. Once everything is cured, I end up with a neat stack of bases that are magnetized and ready to go. Oh, it's easier to put magnets on the bottom of bases before putting models on the top of bases. If the models are already attached, you've got to find a way to hold the minis upside down. I've found that if you cut slits in a piece of cardboard and hold the cardboard over the side of a table, you can hang a bunch of minis by their ankles and glue magnets to their bases without too much fuss. Still, it's easier to put the magnets on the bases first. I've bought extra bases for the most common sizes so that I usually have some magnetized bases ready to go. As long as we get the orientation of the magnets right, they'll all have the same polarity and they'll line up nice and neat. The polarity doesn't matter if you're just sticking the minis to metal surfaces, but it matters a lot if you're sticking them to other magnets. I built most of my magnetic painting handles to line up with the polarity of my bases. I've come to really love these things. These start as a wooden dowel that I cut into 3-inch long pieces. A comfortable diameter is 1¼ inches, which is basically the same diameter as a 32mm base. I sand off the rough edges. I drill a hole in the top and bottom of the sticks and I glue magnets in there. I use a short stack of 10mm diameter magnets for this. Anyway, these handles are cheap, they're comfortable, and they're super convenient. It's a strong hold, but the minis still pop on and off when I want them to, and the holder doesn't interfere with painting the base rim. I use these handles for almost everything, unless I'm working with something really large. I magnetize both sides of the handles. That way it's easy to stick batches of minis down to a baking tray to move them around and keep them organized. I ended up using the same polarity on each side of the handles so that I wouldn't get confused. I do have a couple of opposite polarity handles around here just in case though. Of course, it's also viable to build handles that have different polarities on each end. That way they'll work with any magnetic base that you encounter. There are lots of great options for magnetic painting handles. For a while, this is what I used to prime minis. It's just PVC pipe with steel washers glued on the top. The only problem with washers is that the hole in the middle can be a bit annoying. If you can find bits of steel without the hole, that's even better. These are called strike plates. We'll get back to them in a bit. I've even tried using giant bolts as painting handles. These work, but they're heavy and they kinda hurt my hand. The point is, magnets are fun, and you can be creative. For batch painting, you can stick a whole bunch of minis down to a piece of steel or iron and paint them all at once. I've made a couple of contraptions that involve these pieces of right-angle galvanized steel. This is pretty silly, even for me. But again, magnets are fun and you can be creative with them. Finding clever ways to be efficient makes me happy. If you give it some thought, you might find a system that really jives with you, and it'll make the hobby even more enjoyable. Okay, so baking trays are useful to have around to manage projects that you're actively working on. For deep storage, I like to use a cake pan. The cover keeps the dust out and makes them easy to stack, but you can still see through the top and check what's in there. These often have a Teflon non-stick coating. If you want to reduce the slipping and sliding, you can add some hockey tape or gaffer tape. Keep in mind that some cooking trays are made out of aluminum, which isn't ferromagnetic. So, take a magnet with you when you go to the store. Another option is to build your own storage boxes. There are lots of variants of this. One that I see a lot is to use a clear document box and put a sheet of duct steel in the bottom. These boxes are great. They have flat bottoms, they stack nicely, and they're clear, so it's easy to see and remember what you put in there. Companies like Tableware and Battle Foam sell magnetic cases for transporting minis. The advantage of this over foam is that it's easy to fit minis with strange shapes. And delicate bits won't get stuck in the packaging and break off. Now let me show you how I like to transport my minis. I've got a big toolbox and I built some trays for it. This is a sheet of 14 gauge hot rolled steel. I I don't have the equipment to cut this kind of steel, so I ordered rectangles cut to the dimensions that I wanted from a place online called Metals Depot, and the prices were pretty reasonable. I built some risers that also act as handles from 80/20 T-slot aluminum, and here we go. Once the top is closed, the trays are nice and snug, and I think the flex in the steel even helps a bit with the vibrations. I wouldn't take this on a plane, but it's great for storage, and it's great for transportation by car. Another way to build your own trays is to use MDF and glue duct steel on top. These materials are a bit easier to cut for yourself. If you want to do a custom build and you find yourself ordering some steel, keep in mind that not all steel is ferromagnetic. Some of the nicer grades of stainless steel don't stick to magnets at all, so be sure to run a quick Google search to make sure that you're buying the right stuff. So obviously I like magnets. I've been experimenting with this stuff for years and learning new tricks. As you might be able to tell from some of this old footage, I've been wanting to make this video for a while. The reason I'm finally making this video is because I just took another step forward, and I'm excited to share it with you. These are called strike plates. It's a circle of steel that's 3/4 of an inch in diameter and 1 millimeter thick. These are like washers, but without the annoying hole in the middle. I got 250 of these for $16. The vendor I used was TotalElement.com. These are a great option for sticking under bases. In particular, I'm using them on my Conquest minis. There isn't a lot of room under Conquest bases, but these have a nice fit. They have a very strong hold to my magnetic painting handles, and that's a good start. Now check this out. I added a strip of magnetic tape into the bottom of the Conquest movement tray. Flexible magnetic strips are much weaker than neodymium magnets, but this is perfect for a movement tray. It's got just enough hold to be useful, but it's still easy to remove casualties from the tray. This is the magnetic tape that I'm using. It's 1.2 millimeters thick, and this plus the strike plate is pretty much the perfect height to keep the mini sitting flush. These steel strike plates also act as a bit of ballast to keep the minis from falling over. The Conquest minis can be a bit top heavy, so this really helps. The strike plates weigh about 2 grams each. The average weight of a Conquest mini is about 5 grams, so 2 grams at the bottom is effective without feeling awkward. This is exactly the solution that I was looking for these Conquest models, and now I'm excited to dive on in and paint them up. These strike plates aren't magnets, but if I want to stick the minis to a steel surface, I just need to use the magnet sandwich technique. Magnet sandwich. Steel bread and magnetic meat. Gluing steel to bases is a viable alternative to gluing magnets down there. One advantage is that steel can be thinner than magnets while still being effective. These Game Master minis have very little room under their bases, but there's just enough room there to glue a piece of duct steel. It's the same case for these Humblewood minis from Hit Point Press. There's just enough room to glue a thin bit of galvanized steel. This allows them to stick to my magnetic painting handles just fine, and if I need to stick them to something else, I can use a magnetic sandwich. Now we should talk about the drawbacks of magnets. Using magnets costs time and money. The minis themselves are still way more expensive, but the magnetic accessories definitely add up. It's unwise to keep strong magnets near electronics, so be careful where you put your minis. Don't put them on your phone or near your credit card. I've heard of some folks out there who use LCD screens as RPG tabletops, and this would definitely not jive with magnetic bases. Don't worry though, gang. I broke this monitor by dropping it, not with magnets. When magnetic transportation works, it's much safer than foam. You're less likely to lose spiky bits sticking into that foam. If something goes wrong though and a mini comes loose, then it has the possibility of being a bit more catastrophic. So be mindful. Make sure all the magnets are sticking and avoid potholes. For very important minis, you can increase their safety by adding some blue tack under the base to help the magnet. Now here's a problem that you might not have thought of. If your magnets are too strong and too close to the edge of the base, then your minis might muckle onto each other. This is especially a problem with slotted bases that force you to glue the magnet off to the side. One way to fix this problem is to use a rectangular magnet so that you can position it flush against the slot. Okay, one more case where magnets are a challenge. Resin bases are often solid and don't always have a convenient place to put a magnet. This is true of cast resin and many 3D printed bases as well. You could try to drill a hole or modify the STL files before you print a base, but it's a bit of a hassle. Often, I'll just avoid resin bases entirely. On the whole, I really like magnetic bases, but I thought I'd at least mention some of the drawbacks. I'm constantly learning new tricks. Someday, I'm gonna get good with magnetic flight stands. These are usable, but I'm not quite there yet. Someday, I might get more interested in magnetic customization too. I generally like solid minis, but there are certainly uses for this. Magnets are fun. They make it possible to create efficient systems to help us with our hobby. I hope I was able to give you some good ideas today, and I welcome you to share any tips that you have down in the comment section. Alright, that's it for now. Thanks so much for watching.